Transfer portal season is officially here. It's chaotic, and it's time for Marcus Freeman and Notre Dame to join the fray. That's coming up next.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Irish, your daily Notre Dame podcast. Today is Wednesday, April 24th, and thank you for getting your day started right here by making this your first listen of the day. I'm Tyler Wojciak, and I'm the host. I'm a Notre Dame alum and producer at Fox Sports, and this show is free and available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. If you are watching along on YouTube, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Or if you're on the move and you're listening to the podcast, please take a second, rate the show 5 stars, leave a review, and subscribe there as well. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150. Win or lose, just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. So, the undergraduate transfer portal has been open for just over a week in college football. It opened up on April 15th, and it closes 6 days from now on April 30th. So far, it's been pretty tame. We haven't seen anything that crazy happen yet in this cycle, despite what a lot of people in the media predicted might happen going into it. And by the way, there is still plenty of time for that to change. I probably just jinxed it myself by saying it's been quiet, but now that spring practice is over for the vast majority of teams around the country, including Notre Dame, I expect to see a lot more moving and shaking in the portal over the next few days. As a matter of fact, Notre Dame just had their first player enter their portal since the conclusion of spring practice on Tuesday when rising sophomore quarterback Micah Bell put his name in the transfer portal. So I really want to focus today's episode on what Notre Dame needs to add in the transfer portal over this next week. And as a reminder, this portal window is specific to undergraduate transfers. Graduate students can enter at any time, like Clarence Lewis did a couple weeks ago. So Notre Dame could still, in theory, add someone in the portal after this window closes, but there is still a sense of urgency for all of the guys out there who are considering transferring to enter their name now and make a decision before spots start to get filled up for other teams across the country. So let's talk about Micah Bell for a second. Bell announced on Tuesday that he was entering the transfer portal via social media, and honestly, it wasn't a huge surprise considering the fact that Benjamin Morrison, Christian Gray, Jordan Clark, Jaden Mickey, and Chance Tucker were all ahead of Micah Bell. Plus, you've got Carson Hobbs and Leonard Moore, who are two freshman quarterbacks. They're going to join the team this summer. They're loaded with potential and talent, so it's not like Bell had a shoe in above those guys as well. Those guys are going to come in and compete right away, and it's a crowded room. And that's a testament to what Mike Mickens has done on the recruiting trail. Every single year, he's bringing in top cornerbacks. And then when you bring in so much talent in the room, only 2 to 3 guys are getting out there for most of the reps. So it's hard for guys to really make a name for himself. Micah Bell didn't really look great in that spring game, got burnt by Micah Gilbert for a touchdown. But still, he was a talented prospect coming out of high school. He was in the class of 2023. He was actually rated as the 27th ranked cornerback in the class, and he was just outside the top 250 nationally, according to the 24/7 Sports Composite. He redshirted this past season, but he still appeared in 3 games. He actually made a tackle in the bowl game against Oregon State. I was always intrigued by Bell because he has elite speed. He ran a 10.41 second 100-meter dash in high school, that's absolutely cooking, man. So we knew he had a ton of speed. He still had to get some things figured out on the technique side, had to grow into his body a little bit. But unfortunately for Bell, Christian Gray already beat him out, and they were in the same recruiting class. And Jaden Mickey and other guys had a leg up on him too. So you've got all that to take into consideration if you're Bell. Plus, it looks like Notre Dame is going to try and add a graduate transfer in the portal every single year to play nickel. And that's actually where Micah Bell was getting some reps in spring practice, especially after Clarence Lewis left. He was perceived as the backup at nickel behind Jordan Clark, who Notre Dame brought in from Arizona State. But then they had Jaden Osbury, a linebacker, getting reps there at nickel. So you're like, okay, I think that shows you that the staff doesn't really trust Micah Bell in that position. And I actually understand why. Like, the nickelback in modern college football is a position for grown-ass men. You've got to be able to line up in the box, make tackles in the run game, and you have to have the ability to cover wide receivers and some bigger guys like tight ends in the slot in coverage. It's a really difficult position to play, and it's basically Notre Dame's base defense now. Tariq Bracy really didn't excel at Notre Dame until he was a much older player, and that's when he really took off as the nickel for 2 years. But he really got better in his last year of college. Then Notre Dame added Thomas Harper, who was a graduate senior from Oklahoma State. He had a really good year last year at the nickel, and now they're bringing in Jordan Clark, another graduate transfer, to play that position. I just think that you need to be older, you need to be experienced to play the nickel, and I think Notre Dame is going to prioritize graduate transfers every year for that position. So that really only leaves the boundary corner and the field corner for Micah Bell, and it didn't seem like he was a fit there either. So what does that mean for Notre Dame? I think it means they should add cornerback in the transfer portal. And I actually thought that after Clarence Lewis left, and now I think it's especially important now that Bell is out the door because now Notre Dame is down to just 7 scholarship corners. They have Benjamin Morrison, Jaden Mickey, Christian Gray, Chance Tucker, Leonard, and more. So when you look at it, I just think that that's a pretty light room, and they need to add someone strictly for depth purposes. I'm not saying you need to go out there and add a starter or anything like that, but fortunately, Notre Dame seems to have made a great impression on Trayshawn DeVones. He is the transfer from Rice. He's a cornerback, started throughout last season for the Owls. He had a pretty good season, racked up 45 tackles, 2 interceptions, and 11 pass breakups in his only full year as a starting cornerback. But I'm not totally sold on him. I think he is definitely more of a depth piece. If you look on Pro Football Focus, they have it where DeVones gave up 433 yards receiving last year in coverage. That's a lot. Now, I know you can make the case that, well, he was playing for Rice. It's not like they had the best defense in the world. Some of those yards are going to be attributed to him, but that doesn't mean he was necessarily responsible for every single one. All that's fair, but I think when you look at the Notre Dame cornerback room, there's no way he's going to beat out Morrison, Gray, or Mickey. But he'd still be a good fourth cornerback, especially now that Clarence Lewis is out the door. So I think he would be a perfect fit in that role because Notre Dame is going to use at least 4 cornerbacks throughout the season. Benjamin Morrison is recovering from a shoulder surgery. We all hope and pray that he's going to be ready to go by the start of fall camp, but still, shoulder injuries, they can linger. You don't know if he's going to be healthy. And also, injuries just happen in college football. So you're going to need a fourth corner. They're going to play, and I think DeVones would be perfect for that role, especially now that Lewis is gone and Bell is gone. You don't really want to put Chance Tucker out there or force Leonard Moore to be out there a little bit earlier than they're ready for. I don't know if Trayshawn is going to take it because I think he's probably realistic about his opportunities. If he goes to Notre Dame, he's going to have to fight for a reserve role where he could probably go to other schools. He's got several offers already from Power 5 and Group of 5 programs where he's more likely to play right away. So it's an interesting decision. If he wants to be a part of a team fighting for the playoff, Notre Dame would be a great fit. I do think he'd have a role in this roster, but if it's not him, Notre Dame should still look to add someone in the transfer portal to play cornerback because they're getting pretty light there at the position, and I think it's time to add someone. If you're concerned about Micah Bell transferring and you're concerned about, Notre Dame's future at corner, I would say don't be. This happens all the time in college football. Notre Dame is still 3 players over the 85-man scholarship limit. They have 88 scholarship players right now. More guys are going to leave in the coming days, and more guys who really weren't fighting for a spot on the starting lineup or really as a backup are probably going to leave in the transfer portal in the coming days. So when a player like Bell leaves, it's unfortunate. I would have liked to have seen him stick around a little bit longer just to see if he could put it all together, given the fact that he has that elite speed. But he probably realized that the path to playing time at Notre Dame was pretty rocky, so he left for somewhere else. Now it's on Mike Mickens, Al Golden, and Marcus Freeman to find someone in the portal to replace him because, like I said, 7 isn't a lot for the cornerback position, especially when you've got 3 guys out there for most of the time. They need 1 more. So the Irish need a corner, but that is not their biggest need in this cycle. I'll tell you the position they really need right after this. Today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. We've all been there, either as a player or fan. It's halftime and the scoreboard is not looking good. You're feeling low, not sure you or your team can pull out a win. That's when you dig deep, lift your head up, and say to yourself, time to get back in the game, pull off some bank heists, and take as much of my friend's money as I possibly can. That's right, the smash hit mobile game Monopoly Go lets you compete with your friends to get the most riches and the biggest empire. It's the Monopoly you love, but on your phone anytime with tons of new twists, including leaderboards to compare your progress to your buddies. There's so much to do. You can play on countless dynamic Monopoly boards. You can make your friends bankrupt by smashing their landmarks with a wrecking ball. You can charge other players rent for your iconic properties. And you can even work with your friends to crack open community chests and play in tournaments to get extra rewards and climb that leaderboard. So get back out there, put on your game face, and download Monopoly Go now for free on the App Store or Google Play. Today's episode is also brought to you by Gametime. Gametime is now an authorized ticket marketplace for Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Gametime app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch. And with last-minute deals and all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying Major League Baseball tickets. I actually just used Gametime a couple weeks ago to go to a Dodgers game. Didn't really even plan on it. Looked at Gametime, saw how cheap the tickets were, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to go, and ended up having a great time. All thanks to Gametime. Gametime is the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. You can see the view from your seat on your phone before you buy, but my favorite thing about Gametime is the pricing shows your total cost up front, and you can buy tickets in a matter of seconds, just 2 taps. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Okay, I'll cut right to the chase. Notre Dame needs to look to add a starting tackle in the transfer portal this cycle to elevate the unit as a whole. If you've been an everyday listener of this show over the course of the past few months, you know this topic has come up often, especially in mailbags. Fans are always wondering, what's the deal with the offensive line? Do they need to look to add a transfer in the portal? Is there a chance that Emil Wagner could beat Tosh Baker out? The offensive line has been a very big topic of discussion around the Notre Dame, message boards, the fan community, all of that ever since Joe Wall and Blake Fisher, 2 of the starting tackles from last season, declared for the NFL draft before they graduated. I thought Notre Dame needed to add a transfer tackle in the winter cycle, but it wasn't absolutely necessary because I think we all wanted to see how things would play out in spring practice. But now that spring practice is over, I think it's pretty clear that the offensive tackle position is the biggest weakness on the roster, and they need to clean it up quickly. Unfortunately, finding a real quality offensive tackle, especially one with experience in the transfer portal, is probably the hardest thing to come by. It's not like adding a receiver where there seems to be an infinite amount of wide receivers in the transfer portal, and yet Notre Dame still wasn't able to add one a couple years ago when they absolutely needed one. But that is neither here nor there. They need to add a tackle, and there's just really not that many options. But first, before we get to the different options that are out there, I want to focus on why Notre Dame needs one. Let's look at what Notre Dame has on their current roster at the tackle position. So at left tackle, it looks like it's going to be Charles Jagasaw. Jagasaw is going to be a redshirt freshman this upcoming season. He played in really just one game last season, the bowl game, when he got his first career start going up against Oregon State once Alt declared early and decided to sit out for the bowl game. Prior to that, the only experience Jagasaw had was in the Stanford game, and by the way, he was playing guard in that game. But then they didn't really have any other options at left tackle, so Jagasaw got all the reps in bowl preparation, and that is where he played in that game. I thought he played pretty well. He did give up a sack, but he held his own. But you have to look at what Oregon State had on defense. They had a bunch of guys leave for the NFL transfer portal, so I don't really know what to make of that performance. And to be clear, I think Jagasaw is incredibly gifted. I think he's eventually going to be a great offensive lineman, but he's a long way away from that right now. And you could also make the case, as Tim Priester from Irish Illustrated has done many times now, that maybe Jagasaw is best suited to play guard. When he was coming out of high school, he was listed as a tackle, but there were some people in and around Notre Dame who thought Jagasaw projected as a guard. I mean, hell, he played guard against Stanford, so it's really not that crazy to think. But Notre Dame has guards. They need tackles, and that's why Jagasaw is playing left tackle. And I would just say, as a whole, not even really just specific to Notre Dame, it's incredibly rare for an offensive lineman to be great at such a young age. So it would be unfair to expect that out of Jagasaw in his first year as the starter. He needs time to develop, and he will. He's going to end up being a really good player. There's a reason why Notre Dame is like, yeah, there's a competition at right tackle, which I'm going to get to in a second, but there's really no competition at left tackle right now because Charles Jagasaw is the best one we have at that spot. It says a lot considering how young he is. But this is a crucial year for Marcus Freeman and the entire team. They can't have the second most important position on the offensive side of the ball be a developmental player. Again, I think Jagasaw will be great eventually, but probably not going to happen this year because he's so young and inexperienced. Maybe he'll prove me wrong, but we'll see. He got absolutely torched by RJ Oben in the spring game, and he battled out there, especially against Boubacar Traore. But still, I'm a little bit nervous about Notre Dame's starting left tackle being a redshirt freshman who's never really started that much before. All right, let's go over to the right tackle position. Tosh Baker, fifth-year senior. Looks like he's going to be the starter. I was really hoping that Tosh Baker would shine this spring because this is his moment. He has been waiting for years for the opportunity to be the starter, and now it's here. This is his big opportunity to finally make a name for himself on the field on Saturdays in the fall wearing that Notre Dame uniform. He was a top 100 prospect coming out of high school. He's got all the size in the world, but there's a reason why Joe Alt and Blake Fisher both beat him out despite the fact that they were younger than Baker, and again, Baker had that pedigree coming out of high school. I didn't really like what I saw from Tosh Baker in the spring game. I know a lot of people have been talking about it already. Tosh Baker did get beat by a walk-on in pass protection. I also heard that he struggled mightily in a scrimmage earlier on in spring practice, and I just don't have a ton of confidence in him going up against one of the better defenses on Notre Dame's schedule. I think he's going to be fine against some of the lesser opponents that Notre Dame will play, but when Notre Dame goes to College Station, I know that Texas A&M lost a bunch of dudes to the portal, but still, they have a bunch of talent on that roster. Mike Elko knows a hell of a lot about defenses, and he's going to know how to bring pressure, and I just don't really feel comfortable in that spot with Tosh Baker because every time he's been out there on the field in, whether it be the spring game or when he played a little bit too early, I don't want to hold that against him, but just so far, we haven't really seen enough from Tosh Baker to really feel like he's going to be a really good player for the Irish at right tackle this fall. And then behind Tosh Baker, you've got Emil Wagner. Wagner actually looked really good in the spring game. You can make the case that he had the best game of any tackle that participated. Unfortunately, he's still just a little bit undersized for the position. He's working hard to put on weight. Right now, they've got him listed at 292 on the roster, but most tackles need to be above 300 because it makes a big difference. But I like Wagner's ability. I think he has really good footwork, mobility, and just overall, he's a talented football player. So I'm actually going to go out on a limb here and say that if Notre Dame doesn't add a transfer in the portal this cycle to start at right tackle, I think that Emil Wagner is going to beat out Tosh Baker and start at right tackle in the season opener. That might be a surprise considering that Baker was getting the vast majority of the first-team reps in this spring practice, but think back to last year. Billy Schrouth was getting all the first-team reps at guard, and then after fall camp, Rocco Spindler had beat him out, and he was the starting guard. I could see a similar situation happening at right tackle with Emil Wagner. So behind those three guys, so those are the three guys competing for a starting job, you've got Sullivan Absher, who's a redshirt freshman, and then you've got true freshman Gerby Lambert coming in, and he looks physically imposing. He looks like a future NFL player just based on his size. Plus, he was a top 50 player coming out of high school, and people rave about him, but he was also playing high school against really poor competition in Massachusetts. I think that the jump from high school to college is going to be pretty significant for him. Maybe if Gerby Lambert participated in spring practice, there'd be an outside chance for him to start as a true freshman. I really don't think that's going to be the case now, especially considering the fact that he's going to be joining the team this summer. There's also Anthony Knapp, Styles Prescott. They're really young, and I just don't really think that they have a real chance at competing for the starting job, and that is just a lot of youth behind the starters. So even if Notre Dame isn't able to add a surefire starter, I think it'd still be good to bring an experienced guy in who could help out, maybe even be the backup to Jagasaw. He can have the chance to compete for the starting job, but I just really think that they need to add to that position. And I think a big reason why Notre Dame is in this spot is that they just got some bad luck with two tackles leaving after their junior season for the NFL draft. Notre Dame has recruited the position really well over the past, really, decade. So it's not like they haven't been recruiting well, but it's just rare for tackles to leave after their junior season. Usually they stick around and at least finish out their fourth year, which gives the guys behind them more time to develop. Like I said, Wagner, Jagasaw, Gerby Lambert, eventually they're going to be good, but I think they're going to be thrust into starting positions a little bit too early than when would be ideal for the Notre Dame team. So I'm not going to lie, I'm starting to get worried that this offensive line, at least at the beginning of the year, might look like it did in 2021. And that was a really rough start to the season. They were mixing and matching all over that offensive line, trying to figure out something that worked. Eventually, they landed on something and then had to modify the whole offense going into that North Carolina game to run like up-tempo, no huddle, short passes. And it worked for the end of the year, but hopefully Notre Dame isn't ever at that point. But right now, I'm just a little bit concerned. They have to replace 4 starters. And I actually feel pretty good about the interior guys. Like Pat Coogan, Ashton Craig, and Billy Shrout, they're going to be solid up the middle. But even they could get exposed if the tackles standing next to them aren't able to hold up on a consistent basis. If that's the case, it just brings the entire group down. And if it seems like I'm harsh on the offensive line, that's probably fair. I would say that part of the reason that the offensive line is getting so much attention is because all the other position groups on the roster are in pretty good shape for the most part. Sure, some could be improved, but we're just not used to seeing a Notre Dame offensive line be the biggest question mark because it has been the strength and the identity of this program for more than a decade. So it's just unfamiliar territory for this team and for the fan base, and I think that's part of the reason why there's been so much talk about it, but it's a real issue. And I think we started to see that as spring practice progressed, and now Notre Dame is probably going to look to see if they can add to that. They were pretty aggressive in the winter cycle. I don't know how aggressive they're going to be in the spring because, like I said, there's really not that many options. I went on 24/7. I looked at the options at tackle in the portal. It's not great. Now, there's always a chance that Notre Dame and the staff might have their eye on someone who's not in the portal, wink, wink, but we'll have to wait and see. I certainly don't have any information about that at this point in time, but that was a rumor in the winter that Notre Dame was looking at one guy, waiting to see whether or not he would enter the portal. If they did, they were going to pursue him really aggressively. Whoever that is did not end up putting their name in the portal, and they did not add a tackle in that cycle. So I feel like Notre Dame is going to be aggressive here. They're going to try to find someone, but they're not going to force it, and I agree with that. I don't think they should force it just to throw a guy in that room because at that point, it's like if you're just adding a player who has really no chance of playing ever and you don't even feel comfortable with them out there, well, then at that point, you might as well just let the young guys on your roster you actually believe have a future in the program get out there, make plays, and make mistakes. So hopefully that could accelerate their development. I hope that Notre Dame can add a tackle in the portal, but I'm not entirely optimistic. If they aren't able to add a piece, though, then we're going to have to trust in the entire offensive staff, from Joe Rudolph, the offensive line coach, to Dylan McCullough, coach of the running backs. They're going to have to help out pass protection. Mike Denbrock leading the charge as the offensive coordinator. We're going to have to trust all of them to figure out a way to hide some of these deficiencies at tackle. And hey, it's also possible that one or both of these guys break out and make me look like an idiot. I'd be absolutely fine with that if that ends up being the case. Okay, there's a couple more positions I think Notre Dame should look to add in the transfer portal, including one where they don't even have a choice. That's next. Today's episode is also sponsored by FanDuel. It's playoff time in the NBA and NHL. Baseball is in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150, win or lose. You can bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all in an app that is safe, secure, and super easy to use. What are you waiting for? Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Another position that Notre Dame needs to add to in the transfer portal is the punter. It's an absolute necessity because Notre Dame does not have a punter on the roster right now. Bryce McPherson, the starting punter last season, entered the portal last week, and based on several reports that are out there, it sounds like part of the reason why that he entered the transfer portal is because his starting spot was not guaranteed for next season. Pete Sampson from The Athletic reported that McPherson was very inconsistent throughout the spring, and I actually remember hearing about how Marcus Freeman was really giving it to the punters in practice a couple weeks ago. So maybe that should have been a sign that things weren't really going that well at that position. And then Freeman would go on to say that Notre Dame was going to add a transfer portal after. He said that after the spring game. And I feel like this obviously would have been better off, or Notre Dame would have been better off if this had happened in the winter cycle, but I still think that they're going to be able to find a quality option. Just imagine being a pretty good punter out there. Maybe you're at a Group of 5 school or even a Power 5 school, and you're good. You've got a starting job. You've had some good experience. You've shown that you can be a quality punter, and you're probably pretty content with where you're at. But then you find out, hey, Notre Dame is looking for a punter, and they're looking to go to the college football playoff. Think about the stage that you could play on. I feel like a lot of guys who might not have been considering transferring are all of a sudden going to putting some real thought into that now that the Notre Dame job is opened up. And I believe that there is going to be a line of quality candidates either calling Marty Biagi to find out if they're a real legitimate candidate or just find out what the situation is, because I think it's just that much of a coveted spot. Now, hopefully, on the Notre Dame side, they don't really need a punter all that often this year because the Mike Denbrock offense is clicking on all cylinders. But in all reality, that's not going to be the case. Notre Dame is going to need a quality punter. And I know the name Max Fletcher has been tossed around a lot on Notre Dame message boards. Max Fletcher was the punter at Arkansas for the past couple of years, and he just put his name in the transfer portal a few days ago. Max Fletcher averaged 43.2 yards per attempt in 97 tries over the course of the past 2 seasons. He also downed 33 of those 97 punts inside the 20-yard line and has a career long of 71. So he's a pretty good punter. But for context, Bryce McPherson averaged 2 more yards per attempt last season. He averaged 45.1 yards, but he only placed 5 of those punts inside the 20. So Max Fletcher might not have the leg strength that Bryce McPherson does, but he's a lot better at putting his defense in better field position by downing the opposing team inside their own 20-yard line. So it would be great if Notre Dame were to add a guy like Max Fletcher. I don't have any information as to whether or not Notre Dame is really pursuing Max Fletcher. I would assume that they're at least giving him a look, but I don't know if they're pursuing him that aggressively, if he has any visits scheduled or anything like that. But I do know that Max Fletcher entered his name in the transfer portal the day after that Bryce McPherson said he was going to leave Notre Dame. So maybe the timing wasn't a coincidence. We're going to have to wait and see. But honestly, I'm not really that worried about it. Notre Dame was able to find the GOAT, John Sott, the punter from a couple years ago. They found him from Harvard, and I think they're going to be able to find a quality replacement for McPherson. It might take a little bit of time, but we'll see. So I got a couple more positions that I want to talk about, and these aren't necessarily needs, but I thought, maybe it would be a nice addition. Let's look at tight end. I think Notre Dame could look to add a tight end in the transfer portal, but only if Mitchell Evans or Eli Raridon deal with some sort of setback with their injuries. Now, Eli Raridon isn't recovering from an immediate injury, but he's already had 2 ACL tears in the past 3 years, so they're always going to be monitoring his health. Mitchell Evans suffered a torn ACL in the Pittsburgh game last year, and I thought Eli Raridon looked really good in the spring game. Evans seems to be on track, so I feel like they're in good shape with those two leading the way. I also really liked what I saw from Cooper Flanagan in spring practice and in the spring game. Jack Larson also impressed as well. So the depth chart looks solid. They've got Evans, Raridon, Cooper Flanagan. They've also got Kevin Bauman, but he's dealt with a ton of injuries throughout his career, and he's actually recovering from another season-ending injury. Davis Sherwood is a quality blocker, but he's not like a true tight end. He's more of like a gadget H-back who can come in and make some plays. Hell, he even had a touchdown against NC State last season. So he's nice to have, but not a real true tight end in the terms of what Notre Dame is looking for out of that position. And then, as I mentioned, they've got freshman Jack Larson. So there's a ton of talent in that room, but there's also a lot of injury history there as well. So I think if a quality option presents itself, if Notre Dame is able to sort of luck their way into a veteran tight end who is just looking to end his career at Notre Dame and play in some competitive games, who can provide depth, who's a good blocker, who's content not being the first or second tight end every single game, then yeah, I think you take him, but it's certainly not a need. Okay, one more position, and that is defensive tackle, but this is really only a need if Gabriel Rubio is not able to join the team. So Gabriel Rubio has been away from the university and the team throughout this spring, but he was actually around spring practice, albeit he was wearing street clothes, but he was still there. It sounds like he's moved back to South Bend, and he's on track to return to the team this summer, which is great because I think Gabriel Rubio would be a very important reserve interior defensive lineman. So that's great. I'm really hoping that he's able to rejoin everything and it all goes smoothly, and he's able to play a big part on that defense this season. But if for whatever reason he's not able to rejoin the team, I think Notre Dame should look to add a Chris Smith type player. That's another Harvard player, coincidentally enough. The defensive tackle that they added a couple years ago, he was a reserve, but he ended up playing around like 200 snaps on the season. He ended up being a nice reserve player. I think that if Gabriel Rubio is not able to join the team, they should look to add someone of Chris Smith's caliber because they just need a little bit more depth at that position. They've got a lot of young guys behind Jason Onyé, and I think Jason Onyé would be a really good reserve defensive tackle, but you go from good to great by having Rubio and Onyé together, whereas if Rubio leaves or is just not able to come back, then I think it's time, hey, if you can add a veteran player, go ahead and do that. They also have Sean Sevillano, Brandon Vernon. Those are young guys. I think they'll eventually be good, but it's always nice to have a little bit of a veteran presence, especially at that position, which is for grown men. So what does this say? Because if you really look at it, the only thing I've said so far is that Notre Dame needs a backup cornerback, they need a starting punter, and it'd be nice if they could get a starting tackle as well in the transfer portal this cycle. They'll almost certainly get 2 out of 3. I feel like they're going to be able to find a backup corner and a punter pretty easily, but the tackle remains to be seen. What that tells you, though, is that the roster is in great shape. They don't have a ton of needs, and that's because the staff has recruited really well at the high school level, and they were very aggressive in adding transfers in the winter cycle, and that is the way to do it. You don't want to be in late April looking at your roster like, man, we have some glaring holes we need to fill across the roster. That is not what competitive teams do. That is not what championship caliber teams deal with, and that is not what Notre Dame is dealing with, and that is a really good thing. Now, things could always change between now and the time the portal closes, so let's knock on wood here. But I really, really like this team as a whole. They've got future NFL starters at several positions. They've got quality reserves across the board, and they've got a lot of really promising young players who could eventually be stars later on in their careers, but they could be impactful in this season. So they still need a couple things to have a truly great roster, but they're well on their way there, and that's really exciting if you're a Notre Dame fan. All right, that's going to do it for today's episode. Thanks again for making Locked On Irish for your first listen of the day. Greg Flamung from Irish Sports Daily is going to be back on the show tomorrow. He was part of the pre-spring preview show. Now we're going to revisit a lot of those predictions and just talk about spring practice as a whole, review the blue gold game, all that good stuff. You're going to want to tune in for that. In the meantime, be sure to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you're listening to the podcast, and I'll see you bright and early tomorrow morning.